Taca, which is a copper project in Argentina today. That's a picture of it there, fairly prominent hill with the Salar de Arizaro in the background, which is a dry salt lake, part of the famous lithium triangle of Chile, Argentina and Bolivia. How do I get this thing to move? I think we all agree by now that copper is the critical mineral when it comes to the electrification of everything. First Quantum at a glance, we're a mid-tier copper mining company born out of Zambia and the Congo. We've grown by building new mines. It's been a fairly successful ride with a few bumps along the way, most notably having Cobre Panama, our largest mine, shut down on us last year, but that's another story. Taca Taca is a porphyry copper deposit in the northwest of Argentina in the Salta province, fairly close to the Chile border. Infrastructure is surprisingly good for the area, good roads to the project from either Salta in Argentina or from Chile if you want to come from that direction. It's not too high, it's about just under 3,500 metres above sea level, but it's not a mountainous terrain, it's in the altiplano. Discovery history, well, it's a big hill that sticks out of the ground. It was first geologists who walked over it, I'm sure, recognised what it was, but officially it was sort of discovered in the 60s, drilled in the 70s, and then had a fairly thorough going over in the 90s, but they were looking for the exotic copper that had been leached out of that prominent white hill there. They did find quite a bit of supergene mineralisation, but it never really took off. And then Canadian entrepreneur Ross Beattie purchased it along with half a dozen other similar projects in South America in the early 2000s when the copper price was very low. He systematically drilled those out and sold them off over the next decade or so, making himself a lot of money. Notably, this one was optioned to Rio Tinto in 2008, and they drilled the first deep holes into the deposit that discovered some pretty good hypogene mineralisation. Unfortunately, 2008 was a bad year for Rio and quite a few other people, so they chose not to continue with the option. By then, the Lamina guys knew what they had and kept it for themselves, and then drilled it out over the coming years until it was a 2 billion tonne deposit. First Quantum then purchased it off them in 2014 for just under $500 million Canadian, which worked out at about 2 cents a pound copper. So I guess the market context is that, if we think that the demand for copper is going to grow at the same rate that it's been growing at for roughly the last 50 years, then we're going to potentially need up to another 20 million tonnes of new copper supply over the next 20 years, which equates to 4 Taca Tacas a year for 20 years. It's a big task and an expensive one. How are we going to do that? Well, there's plenty of copper that we know about in the world. That chart there contains about 70 copper deposits undeveloped that have more than 5 million tonnes of contained copper. All we have to do is build them. Sounds easy, but they all have issues, including Taca Taca. But things have conspired to make Taca Taca a compelling project at the moment. The jurisdictional risk is reduced dramatically in Argentina, and rising copper prices helps with the other issue that Taca Taca has, which is a large leach gap on top that needs to be moved before you get to the ore. So just a quick overview. Globally, it's about a 3 billion tonne resource at 0.4 copper and a decent gold credit with moly as well. Reserve 1.7 billion tonnes, 0.44. We'll put in a 40 million tonne per annum plant and expand that to 60 later on when we get through the high grade supergene mineralisation and the grade drops off. First Quantum has built 2 of these similar plants in the past, so we're going to use the same template, use our learnings from what we learned from building Cobre Panama and Sentinel in Zambia before that. So we have a good handle on what these things will cost, how long it will take, and that it will work at the end once we've built it, and that we see as our competitive advantage in the industry. And it'll be a top 25 global copper producer, peaking at 275,000 tonnes per annum copper and 200,000 tonne life of mine. So it's a significant mine. And we're updating our feasibility study at the moment. What I'm showing you there is based on a 2021 43101 report, which is a bit out of date now. CapEx is around 3.6, that's 2021 dollars, so it'll probably be more than that. But our study back then was using $3 copper and 1,400 gold. It was still a hefty NPV and IRR, but it'll be better now. That'll be coming out in the next little while, we hope, when we release our updated study. The big problem with this deposit and why it wasn't mined 30 years ago is that there's 240 million tonnes of waste sitting on top of the ore before you get to start mining actual ore. That's going to take 3 years to move. But once you get down to it, you've got a nice supergene blanket. So in terms of what this will do for Argentina and for our shareholders, we hope this 32-year mine life, thousands of jobs, lots of revenue and taxes for the government. Quick geological overview. It's a fairly typical variant on the porphyry theme. You have a barren potassic core in the middle, which is feldspar and quartz stockworks, and then around the edges of that you have the copper mineralisation, which gradually fades out into a barren pyrite zone. That has been leached vertically down until the water table, and then you get this nice upgrade in the supergene blanket. You'll notice that the carapace of mineralisation only goes around one side of the barren core. The other side is underneath the salt lake, the salar. It potentially is mineralised there, and there are some holes into it that suggest that it is, but it's quite deep and it's not a priority to drill it out at the moment. Interestingly, the age of this deposit is the same age as the giant deposits in Chile of Escondida and Chuquicamata, so it's a back arc outlier of the Oligocene arc in Chile. That's just a couple of viewpoints of the grade shells. You've got the white hill that you saw in the image earlier, which is the barren core, and then around the margins of that you've got the copper mineralisation. Cross section looking north, you can see that the red is greater than 0.75 copper. That's the supergene blanket, and that's a long section, so you can see the scale of our issue of moving that hill out of the way before we get to the ore. But once we get there, it's a very substantial ore body. The scale bar there is 1 kilometre. The pit's about 600 metres deep at its deepest, and potentially could go deeper. It's open at depth. Just a few intersections to show you the tenor of the supergene blanket. It's frequently thicker than 100 metres at better than 1%. 800 metres to 1 kilometre long by 300 metres wide. So once we do get down to it, it's going to be a pretty nice pit, and that'll help with the payback. Site layout is very favourable. It's a very dry desert, essentially, minimal impact on environment, or there's no farming, there's no people that live there. It conveniently has a railway line running right through the project. That railway is operational, although it'll need some upgrading to take our concentrate down to Chile. There's a power line 100 kilometres to the north that we can tap into that has ample capacity on it as well. So lots of room for infrastructure. Tailings dam is in a natural compound. That's the railway line down to Chile. It goes to Mejillones, which is a major copper port in Chile. It's probably, the copper equivalent of Port Hedland in WA. So that's, a huge advantage. The tailings is in an ideal natural impoundment, so all we need to do is put a dam across a narrow neck at one end of it. It's 8 kilometres long, so there's a huge capacity to store all of our tailings. In terms of contamination, the groundwater under that mini salar there is, you couldn't make it any worse by contaminating it with a bit of tailings, because it's 10 times saltier than the ocean. It's highly toxic already. Water was the big bottleneck when we bought this project. We had to do a lot of work to ensure that we had a viable supply. It's completely dry. When we bought the project, the exploration camp had 3 years of weather data, and it had rained 13 times, and 9 of those were in 1 year. 1 year it only rained once. So rain is not a supplier of water here, but snow is. There's some high mountains that get frequent annual snow, and that is fortunately flowing into a number of these very wide and very deep gravel-filled valleys. We've drilled those now and identified several billion cubic metres of water-saturated gravels in multiple separate aquifers. So the mine will draw water from at least 3 of these gravel basin aquifers, up to 5, to make sure that we're not depleting any one aquifer too much. And then there's abundant hypersaline water in the salar, which we will use in the mine, but obviously it has limitations in where we can use that. Power is readily available. As I said, there's a high voltage power line 100 kilometres to the north. That's being fed by a gas-fired power station in Salta, and it runs all the way into Chile. And then subsequently there's been 500 megawatts of installed solar capacity, which feeds into that grid, which we can also tap into. There's also potential for wind, although it's so windy that apparently it's not ideal for wind because it's just too windy up there. But it's one of the best places in the world to do solar because it's just very reliable sunshine and high altitude. So although it is, high Andes, it's as far as infrastructure goes, it's as good as you can hope for. That's the nearest town to the project, Tola Grande, population 150. Suffice to say that it will be a FIFO operation. The salar is extremely hard. You can put an airstrip on it. There is already an airstrip on it for a mine to the south, Lindero gold mine. So we'll put an airstrip in, bring our people in that way, or on the train, or drive in, drive out. So that is Taka Taka in a nutshell.